Dear friends, would like to welcome you to this video of the School of the Golden Rosy Cross. Dear friends, today we'd like to talk to you about a different perspective of Christmas. That's why we call this video Spiritual Christmas. And it is also linked with a very important aspect of the transformation of the human consciousness and human life that we are alluding to as the secret of inner alchemy. To begin with, we'd like to share with you what we in the spiritual school see as the inner dimension of Christianity. We see Christianity, the Christian tradition, as part of the universal teachings, as part of the wisdom that has been manifested in all mankind history, in all times, in all places, and for all different cultures. So, Christianity is one of these main different traditions. We can see Christianity from an outer or inner perspective. That's why we are using in this presentation those two terms, exoteric and esoteric. It means the outer, the external aspect of any tradition, and the inner meaning or the inner aspect of any tradition that belongs to the universal teachings, as Christianity does. So, speaking now about Christmas itself, we can see it as the symbol of the birth of light in the world, or the birth of light for all mankind. And we know the history, we know the traditions of Christianity, the very, very beautiful and insightful traditions that bring important symbols for us to understand from the traditional and historical standpoint. But there is also the inner dimension of Christmas. And the inner dimension of Christmas point to the symbol of the birth of light in the human being. In Christianity, we have four main celebrations. Three of them are very well known by most of the people. The fourth one is a celebration that took place in the Middle Ages in Europe. Those four celebrations are the four different aspects, or they represent the four different aspects of that inner transformation process that we are alluding to as the spiritual aspect of Christmas, and also as the secret of the inner alchemy or the inner alchemical process. We are talking about Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and the fourth one that is not so well known is called the Mani Sola. And they represent the four seasons of the year as the four doors of transformation that we see in nature, in a very beautiful but also very real and concrete association with the inner transformation process. We are talking about winter, spring, summer, and fall. The four seasons, when we understand them as those four aspects of the inner transformation, can be seen as those four aspects inside the human being, as a new seed, as a new bloom or a new blossoming, as a new flower or the flourishing of something absolutely new in the human being and the human consciousness, and the fruit, where the tree finally in a mature manifestation state, bear fruit, not only for itself, but for all life around it. We can see as well those four aspects in direct correlation with the four classical aspects of alchemy. Here we are alluding to the nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, and rubedo. So now we would like to explore with a little bit more of depth the aspect of this inner alchemy as the manifestation in the human being of a new consciousness and a new state of life. We can see the Christian tradition with its roots in the Hebrew tradition, also with its sources in a much deeper source, the Egyptian culture. So it's very easy for us, because of the history of those cultures, to see a thread of the symbolism that lies underneath all those traditions. We'll try to give you just one small example so that you can see the parallel of those symbols. There are four main characters from a narrative perspective in the Gospel. Of course, the Gospel is a marvelous book with an extremely deep and spiritual tradition filled with very meaningful characters. Here we'll try to allude just to the four main ones from the inner narrative process perspective. We are talking about Herod, John the Baptist, Jesus, and Christ. And what we would like to add right now is that those four characters from the esoteric Christianity perspective, in other words, from the inner transformation process perspective, they are four different aspects of the same consciousness, in other words, of the same human being. So, they indicate that we start off with a certain state of consciousness, and with this inner process of transformation, we go through several spirals of transformation. Those spirals of transformation can be seen in the Egyptian tradition, in a very special place in the temple of Abu Simbel, at the very southern border of Egypt in our days. At the very last wall, the deepest chamber of this temple, we can see four statues that represent four different characters. Ptah, the Lord of Darkness. Then Ramses, the Pharaoh king. Sitting by Ramses, we can see Ramses himself in the shape of Osiris, the god Osiris, that represents immortality. And sitting by Osiris, or Ramses in the shape of Osiris, we can see Horus. That is the hawk god that represents the spirit itself, the highest power of ideation in the entire universe. So those four statues, or those four figures, they have a direct correlation with the four main characters of the Christian gospel. And now we would like to talk a little bit about the meaning of those four main characters from the perspective of the inner transformation process. The first character that we saw here mentioned as Herod or Ptah They allude to the awakening of a new state of consciousness. Herod represents the ego, the human self-aware state of consciousness. Ptah, the Lord of Darkness, also represents that state of awareness. And in that particular state of awareness, when we have reached the full potential of our ego, the full potential of our self-awareness, symbolically speaking, when we have gone up to the very limit of everything that we can do from an egocentric standpoint, it seems that something absolutely new and fundamentally different awakens inside of us. We have mentioned that during the winter time, a new seed can be planted deeply on earth. It means that that seed, the seed of the universal principle, the seed of the real life of the human being, can then become active. And in the moment that this seed of a new consciousness becomes active in us, we'll never be able to live the same kind of life that we lived before. Everything that brought us satisfaction and fulfillment in life will have a different taste. Our perspective in terms of the meaning of our lives will change. The answers that we have gathered in the previous aspects of our lives will also start to fade a little bit. And we will start a quest for new answers. The answers that could provide us a different perspective, a true insight into the real meaning of our existence. We become seekers, seekers of ourselves, seekers of the truth, seekers of the real meaning of life. Then we transition from the first aspect of the manifestation of our consciousness that we described as Herod or Ptah into the second aspect of our manifestation. As seekers of the truth, symbolically speaking, our consciousness manifests itself as John the Baptist or Ramses the Pharaoh. That transition means that we start to walk on the desert of life because we start to perceive a life without the understanding of its true meaning as a desert. It doesn't matter if we are rich or poor, if we are healthy or not. We continue to live our external life the best we can with all the love and care we can for all others around us. But inside, it is as if we were walking on a desert. Because it is an arid desert, given the fact that the real meaning of our existence is still far from us. But we walk, we continue our inner path, and we seek. And we go up to the very limit of our own consciousness. That very limit of our own consciousness is symbolically represented in different traditions as, rivers or the sea or the ocean. So in the old Egyptian tradition, we can see that limit as the Nile, with the eastern border or the western border that relates to the land of the living and the land of the dead. The Hebrew tradition talks about the Red Sea and the crossing of the Red Sea. The Christian tradition talks about the Jordan River. And in more modern terms, more recent terms, we also saw the Atlantic and Finisterre at the very end of the path of Santiago de Compostela as that limit. And now, especially in America, we can see the Pacific and the search for gold that led the human beings to that very border as, symbolically speaking, a new limit of our consciousness, or a place that represents a new limit of our consciousness. Well, focusing now on the Christian tradition, John the Baptist walks until the very limit of the Jordan, and there he announces to all the aspects of his consciousness, represented by the people around him, his thoughts, his feelings, his reactions, he announces the truth that he yearns for. So John finally sees, at the very border of the Jordan, he sees the truth that he has yearned for such a long time. That truth, symbolically speaking, is represented by Jesus. So John sees this much higher state of awareness, the state of awareness of a human consciousness touched and enlightened by the manifestation of the universal principle in itself. He sees his very own and other half coming into his direction. And the encounter of John and Jesus in the middle of the Jordan, it means beyond the limit of his old state of consciousness, is represented by the touch of a dove. The touch of a dove in Jesus on his head, representing that the spirit is already connected with that particular state of consciousness. That is the third state of consciousness, designated by Jesus or by Ramses in his divine form as Osiris. And this state of consciousness then starts an entire revolution inside the human being, represented by the change in the 12 magnetic forces that drive human life, symbolically speaking, the 12 disciples, by a series of quote-unquote miracles with miraculous cures of the blind, of the crippled, and even the resurrection of the dead. From the inner perspective, all those miracles, they represent fundamental transformations. Transformations of how we see and interact with the world, our head, on how we live our lives, our heart, and the power that drives us, the power that keeps us in movement in our lives. A new energy or a new etheric force, and a new sentimental force or a new astral force, represented by a new bread and a new wine. So this third state of consciousness is truly a state of consciousness that lies beyond the limit of common human manifestation. And that is why it is portrayed as a miraculous character, as a miraculous state of consciousness that can truly transform inside out our entire lives. And when this third state of consciousness has gone his entire path of transformation of all the aspects of our existence, then a fourth state of consciousness, represented by the Christ or Horus itself, that represents also the spirit, then this fourth state of consciousness takes place. And this fourth state of consciousness, based on the third state that represents a totally new and spiritual consciousness, consolidates in us an organic transformation. Not only a new state of consciousness united with the spirit, but all the organic process of our entire being are also touched and transformed. And that is one of the inner meanings of the resurrection of our entire self after a third day. It means the three aspects of our manifestation, as we have alluded before: our heart, our head, and our hands. Dear friends, this inner process of transformation that we tried to describe to you using the symbol of an inner Christmas, a spiritual Christmas, that also represents the secret of inner alchemy, is something that is absolutely close to each one of us. All of us, we carry this seed, this spark of the spirit of the entire universe in ourselves. And in the moment that this seed or this spark becomes active, an entire new perspective is open to our lives. This process is something that can and should be carried out for all those that have this spirit spark awaken, active in them, where the seed of a new life starts a process of transformation, a process that cannot be stopped, a process that in us, in our consciousness, is something very close to a chain reaction. This process has been carried out by the spiritual schools of all times, and it is also the effort of the work of the spiritual school of the Golden Rosy Cross in our days. We truly hope that the elements that we have shared with you in this short video have helped you somehow in your own inner quest. Based on that, and in this so special time of the year, we'd like to wish you, from the very bottom of our hearts, a truly new and totally unique Christmas. A Christmas that means the birth of light in the human heart. So, let us wish you a true spiritual Christmas. Thank you.